Today we're going to be going over Phoebe and joining her to battle the cult of. Well, actually, it's kind of her own cult, but anyways, the newest 5-star resonator coming out in 2.1. We'll be going over her rotation, talent priority, weapon options, echo set, sequences, best teams, comparison with Gen C, and overall impression of her. Before we start, the information in this video is based on stats and sequences in beta. While it's unlikely to change at this point, it's possible, so treat this like patch notes, subject to change. So the first thing to note about Phoebe is that she can be used for two different roles, support and DPS. First we'll be going over her role as a main DPS. In order to enter the DPS stance, you must first fill up your forte. Phoebe has a unique forte that accumulates automatically over time called Prayer. It caps out at 120 and generates 5 every second. Once your prayer is full, hold the basic attack button down to cast a charge attack. This will consume all of her prayer, put her in her DPS stance, and cast Absolution Litany. This will give you a second forte bar as well, capping out at 60 energy called Divine Voice. This new forte bar starts out full, and will be consumed throughout her rotation. And now for the effects of her DPS stance. It applies 1 stack of Spectral Frazzle, increases the multiplier of her ult by 255%, and most importantly, allows her to cast Star Flash. Star Flash can actually be cast in both stances, but it has a much different effect depending on which stance you're in. In her DPS stance, Star Flash will gain 256% damage amplification, which is massive. Since you can cast this 4 times, this becomes the primary source of her damage, allowing her to scale with heavy damage very well. Star Flash normally costs 30 forte energy, but her DPS stance allows her to bring that down to 15. There are 3 different ways to cast Star Flash. 1, by using your Stage 3 basic attack, 2, a dodge counter, or 3, using a heavy attack. Star Flash does consume stamina, so I'd probably not do the heavy attack. Now there's one massive caveat to her DPS stance. In order to get that massive DPS increase to her Star Flash, the target must have Spectral Frazzle applied. Because Phoebe only adds 1 stack of Spectral Frazzle from her forte, her subsequent Star Flash hits will not get that massive damage amplify buff. In order to get that massive damage amplify buff, you must have another character that can generate Spectral Frazzle. The only character that can apply Spectral Frazzle right now, outside of Phoebe, is Rover. This means that Phoebe's best teams for her DPS stance will include Rover. And just for one more thing to note, her DPS stance does give her a buff to her outro. It's a 255% damage multiplier increase, which is significant, but not the primary source of her damage. And now we'll quickly go over her support stance. Phoebe's support stance is all about Spectral Frazzle. After generating your 120 prayer, you can switch to her support stance instead of her DPS stance by holding down her resonance skill. This casts her forte Utter Confession, which does the following. It generates 1 stack of Spectral Frazzle, generates 40 Concerno energy versus the 10 that you get from entering DPS stance, allowing her to be switched out much more quickly. It enables her Liberation to generate 8 stacks of Spectral Frazzle to targets on hit. It adds 5 stacks of Spectral Frazzle when casting Star Flash, which you can only do twice in this stance. And for the most important part, upon casting your outro, you'll gain a Spectral Res Shred buff for 10% for the active resonator, and give a 100% Spectral Frazzle damage amplification. It also extends Spectral Frazzle's damage dealing cycle by 50%, allowing stacks to fall off more slowly. These outro buffs last for 30 seconds, and are the core part of her supportive kit. As for how much damage her support form does, I'll cover this in the team building sections, but a quick TLDR, the DPS stance will have a higher damage ceiling, as there isn't a good DPS to utilize Spectral Frazzle to make it stronger than her DPS form at the moment. And now that we finally know how her kit works, we can get into her rotation, which is actually very simple. For her DPS rotation, you're going to want to start with the skill, and then do a heavy attack to immediately cast Absolution Litany and consume your prayer. After this, you'll use her Liberation, followed by casting Basics 1 to 3 4 times, and cast Star Flash at the end of each Basic 3. At this point, her Resonant skill will be off cooldown so you can cast it again. Then do a couple more Basics if you don't have enough Concerto at this point, and use your outro. As for her support rotation, it's just as simple. Start by pressing your skill, and then holding the skill to use her forte, Utter Confession. Do your Liberation now, as it will generate 8 stacks of Spectral Frazzle. Then do your Basics 1 to 3 2 times. You could also use heavy attacks here to cast your Star Flashes, but either will work since this can be a shorter rotation. Do a few more auto attacks and cast your skill before you outro. And now we can quickly go over Phoebe's skill priority. For DPS Phoebe, you're going to want to level her Forte, followed by her Liberation, then Skill and Normal Attack equally. If you have the extra resources, you can pour them into her intro, but it's not necessary. As for Support Phoebe, the amount of damage you gain from leveling your skills is close to equal. This is because she loses the multiplier buff on her Liberation and her Forte. Since none of her skills buff her Spectral Frazzle damage, it's better to level her like you would a DPS, since you can use her in both roles that way. As far as her Echo set goes, Eternal Radiance is the way to go, as it provides very solid buffs, including 20% crit rate for inflicting Spectral Frazzle on an enemy, which she'll do in either stance. As for main Echo stats, for your 4 cost, you're going to want to go crit damage. For your 3 cost, 2 Spectral damage bonus will be optimal, and for 1 cost attack percent will be the way. As for substats, try to prioritize crit damage and then attack percent, followed by heavy damage bonus. And just for a little more clarity, the Spectral damage 3 cost is roughly 3.5% better than the attack percent alternative for Phoebe's personal damage. So if you have a lot of damage bonus in your substats or have a really good attack percent 3 cost, it can be perfectly viable. As for 5-star weapons, her signature will definitely be her best, followed by String Master and Rhyme Drape Sprouts as very good alternatives. Cosmic Ripples is quite a bit worse, but a decent alternative if you don't have any other options. And now moving on to the 4-star options, the results are quite surprising. The Battle Pass weapon at R1 and R5 beat the standard 5-star weapon, and the free weapon being slightly better than the Battle Pass weapon at R5. As for Support Phoebe, her signature will definitely stand out from the rest because it gives a Spectro Damage Amplify buff. Spectral Frazzle currently caps out at 10 stacks and does not do significant damage as of right now. This, however, could change with the launch of 2.1 since her support rotation alone gives 19 stacks of Spectral Frazzle, and since Curl often does last-minute changes. Because of this, I'll do a follow-up guide for her support info upon her release. And now we'll get into team options. So for a really comfortable high-utility team, Shorekeeper, Rover, and Phoebe will be a solid choice, with Rover providing those much-needed Spectral Frazzle stacks and granting 10% Spectral Res Shred at S6. Since Phoebe does a lot of heavy damage, Mortefi would be a good option, but since you lose Spectral Frazzle very quickly, Phoebe only ends up being able to buff 1 hit of Star Flash at best. And with that being said, we can talk about Phoebe's highest damage potential team. Since Rover's Forte delays Spectral Frazzle stacks falling off for 9 seconds and can easily generate Spectral Frazzle stacks, you can put Rover in the first slot and do Mortefi and Phoebe's full rotation with Spectral Frazzle lasting the entire duration. So if you don't have Shorekeeper or want to free up your Shorekeeper for the other team, this team is more than viable. And now we'll quickly go over how good she is versus Jinxie's best team. For Phoebe's team, Rover is using Blazing Brilliance, Mortefi with Static Mist, and Phoebe with her signature. For Jinxie's team, all 3 characters have their limited signature weapon. On top of that, all the characters on that team are limited characters, whereas Phoebe's team is very budget friendly. Because Phoebe is a dot character, it's likely that we'll see more flexibility with her in the future, making Phoebe a solid pickup even if you have Jinxie. And now we can finally go over Phoebe's sequences. For her DPS stance, Phoebe's S1 provides an 8% damage increase by buffing her Liberation multiplier. S2 gives about a 23% increase over her base by buffing her outro skill quite significantly. S3 provides another Star Flash multiplier increase, making Star Flash damage even higher. This is a great stopping point if you're not planning on going for S6. S4 and S5 only provide about a 1% increase each, making them stepping stones for S6. Phoebe's last sequence, S6, puts her at a whopping 117% increase over her base, granting her a small attack buff when casting her skill inside either stance, and causing the skill to cast a free Star Flash, which you can do 2 times in Phoebe's DPS rotation. As for Phoebe's support stance, there's a good chance that Spectral Frazzle could be changed alone. Phoebe's S1 alone causes her Liberation to put maximum Spectral Frazzle stacks on the enemy's hit, but since her rotation alone inflicts 19 stacks total, with a few falling off throughout her rotation, and the current maximum is 10, I'm thinking they might increase the maximum stack for Spectral Frazzle. Or they could release a character that can do this. Of course, take this information with a giant grain of salt. Because of this, I'll be making a separate video upon her release going over her as a support. And to wrap things up, here are my overall impressions of Phoebe. Phoebe's damage rivals Jinsei, and utilizes more free-to-play friendly characters such as Rover and Mortefi. This makes her have very good pull value if you're a newer player, don't have Jinsei, or want to free up your shorekeeper for another team. Her support form will likely get value in the future as well, as Kuro seems to be putting an emphasis on the newer negative status feature. If you like this guide, please leave a like and subscribe, as I'll be making a pre-release guide for Brant as well. And if you'd like me to cover something else, let me know in the comments below. And thank you for watching.